Spanning the entire globe, involving hundreds of different cultures, explaining the same phenomenon by different names.
The nature of the footprints, namely their remarkable consistency, their biomechanical appropriateness, those aspects that are extremely compelling.
Hey everyone, how you doing?
Hey everybody, it's Dana and
it's Tim. How you guys doing today? How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm super
awesome,
excited about having our first witness show.
Yeah, super excited about that.
Yeah, so we're usually interviewing a lot of the people who influence the world of Bigfoot, but witnesses also influence because, those are the very lucky people who have some type of interaction, whether it be visual or audio or smell or whatever. So we're really excited to have two witnesses on today. So Tim, you wanted to talk about some Bigfoot in the news, right?
A few things, and then I'll let you kind of introduce our guests.
Awesome.
And what's interesting about having witnesses is many of the researchers, that's how they got into this, because they had an encounter that changed their life, and it just put them in a different life path, and many will say how it changed their lives forever. So it's so super cool. Just want to talk about a couple of things, a couple of folks that are in the news, a couple good things going on. Want to share some warm and fuzzy things. I got a pretty cool book review earlier this week, which made me feel good. It's always nice to hear that. But there's a couple individuals out in Missouri, because we were talking about going to the Ozarks, Dane and I were, and they're Shane Carpenter and Randy Harrington are out there doing some interesting things. Shane was just recognized by Daniel Perez in Bigfoot Times as the Bigfoot of the Year, but they're out in an area finding some really interesting things and collecting data. They're collecting footprint casts, or they're creating casts from footprints that they're collecting amongst things, but they're tracking these individuals over a span of a couple of years. So they're finding a track that's could be and these numbers aren't accurate. It could be 7 inches one year, and then 8 inches the next year, and then 9 inches, and they're tracking it. It's helping them look at a family group out there. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I know our friend Dan Nadrello, the biologist, I think he's been down there with them a few times. So I just thought that was pretty cool to share. I want to share one more thing. We got a new individual that's selling the book, which is really cool. So his name's Vincent from Bigfoot Treehouse. I'm going to try to share the screen here. If I can do this, should have done this ahead of time, so I apologize, you guys. But I think I can make it work so pretty quickly. So make sure I pull it into the stream here. So here's where you can buy the book. A few places, some have autograph locations where if you buy the book, you can get a signed copy. If you buy the book from Lauren Coleman, for example, at the International Cryptozoology Museum, not only you get my signature, but Lauren signed all of the books on his chapter. So just some really cool things. That's where you can get the book. And just want to give a really, really fast, warm and fuzzy thank you to Megan Dykman. She put a nice comment this past week and just said a few nice things about the book. So thank you, Megan, for that. And we'll get to it. That's all I had. So you want to talk about our guest today?
Sure. So, we're excited for today's show. We have two witnesses joining us today to share their, very unique experience and compelling sightings. So Henry will be joining us to share his experience in Mississippi. And then we're going to have Steve from Louisiana to share about what happened with him in Arkansas about 46 years ago while he was on a weekend leave during his time in the service. So the first person that we're going to bring on is Henry. And so we're super excited to have Henry.
Let's bring him in.
Yeah. Hey, Henry.
Hey, guys.
It's good to have you on the show.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yep, we're
Yeah.
super excited about hearing your story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're thank you for I know sometimes this isn't easy for some people to share their stories, but
Yep.
thank you for doing that. We appreciate you jumping on and choosing us to share some, what happened to
Oh,
you.
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so take us back to your encounter. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, I was coming north on Highway 61. I was driving, and this happened on January 13th, 1998, so just 25 years ago. And I was coming home. It was about 1:15 in the morning,
Because where were
and
you
I
coming home
saw
from?
Greenville, Mississippi,
Oh, were you coming home from a party, from work, from friend's house?
friend's house.
Okay,
Actually,
okay. Okay,
brother-in-law's
your
house.
brother-in-law. Okay. Who
Hmm.
could be your friend too?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Anyway, I was driving, and all of a sudden, about 150 yards ahead of me, I spot something. It looks like an individual, but I'm thinking, what can an individual be doing walking around at this time of night on the highway, which is extremely dangerous?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was walking across the highway from left to right. And I wasn't thinking Bigfoot at the time. I was thinking it was just some crazy guy must be walking around the highway. So I get up to the point where it crossed the road and it was standing in a ditch. And it was pretty tall. I can't estimate how tall it was, but it was pretty big. It was muscular. It was a dirty white color.
Oh, wow.
And it never looked at me, never looked at the car. It just stood there and looked off to the east. It was looking. It was facing east. I was coming. I was coming north. It was facing off to the east. It just stood there in the ditch. Now, I never understood why it just stood there in the ditch.
So, hey, just out of curiosity, before this sighting that you had, like, what were your thoughts on Bigfoots? And
I had had an interest since 1976.
okay, so you were already kind of aware of the possibility of Bigfoots existing.
Mm-hmm. I was.
Okay. Yeah. And so how long would you say your encounter was? Like seconds, a minute?
Probably about 15 seconds.
Right. So when you saw him standing in the ditch, did you think to pull over and check it out? Or were you just completely like freaked out?
Well, I felt a bit of fright because I didn't know what it would do if I were to pull over.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
So how fast were you traveling, Henry?
I'm sorry.
How fast were you traveling? Were you going like 25 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour?
I don't remember how fast I was going. It wasn't very fast at all when I passed it. Because
And
I got a good look at it. I got a good look at it from the back, and it was, like I say, it was pretty muscular. I'm thinking, holy smokes! I think I may have just seen a Sasquatch.
I mean, that has to be crazy. That has to be like just like I mean, were you able to see, so you saw mainly the back of the animal? Were you able to
Uh-huh.
see the front at all? Did you see any facial features or
No, it never looked at me.
okay, so it just kept its back to you.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
stood
actually,
in the
when I first saw it, I saw it from the side, and it had a
okay.
pretty massive deltoid muscle.
Okay. That was something that jumped out to you.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, was how muscular it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, how would you say that when you saw it as you what at what point in your sighting did you realize that it wasn't a person?
Well, I think right away. I think right
Yeah.
away I realized gosh, that doesn't look like a person because it would have to be a pretty good suit. It would have to be skin tight suit
No. I
in
mean,
order
like, as
to.
far as you saying, because I remember you saying that at first when you were driving, you thought, oh, who's this crazy dude out in the highway in the middle of the night? So at first
Hmm.
you saw it and you thought it was a person, like, not in a costume, but just like a person. But how long
Yeah.
did it, like, at what point did you realize, oh my God, this isn't a person, this is a Sasquatch, or this is some other kind of animal?
When I saw it, I realized all of a sudden it just hit me right there.
Wow.
Right. And you just knew at that point, this is not a person.
I knew, yes.
Right. Besides just maybe how he looked, but maybe even did it seem like it moved very differently than a person?
When I saw it walk across the highway, it sort of walked like a cross country skier, much like
Hmm.
PG film.
Okay. That's very interesting that you would say that. Super interesting.
Said it, and it crossed the road pretty quick, I assume.
Yes, it did.
So you see this thing, you keep on driving, and how much do you remember how much longer you had to drive before you got home?
I had to go about 10 more miles.
Wow.
How was that trip home?
It was pretty harrowing because I'm also going through in my mind. I'm thinking I'm going through the possibilities of what I could have seen.
Right. And I think that's normal. I think that's normal human rationing, because we try to like ration it like, okay, that was not a Sasquatch. That was,
Something
and you
else.
start going through just to kind of like talk yourself out of the craziness of the whole thing. So that's probably what you were doing, right?
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
So what did you do down now? So who'd you tell first, or what happened afterwards?
Well, I don't think I told anybody for quite a while. I think I told my mom, and she was like, "Yeah, whatever."
Oh my God.
Uh,
And so here's an interesting question. So, when people say, I mean, if you've seen one, they exist. So,
hmm.
I mean, like, how do you how do you try to convince people that don't believe it exists after having your experience? Like, what would you say if I said, you know what, Henry, I don't believe that Bigfoots exist? What would you say to me?
I would say, well, the only thing I can tell you is that I saw one, and that there is compelling evidence out there. There's the footprint cast. There's the strange hair samples. There's the strange fecal matter, which
Right.
all come back unidentified. I mean, yeah, they come back unidentified, but still, where there's smoke, there's fire, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Absolutely.
So the area where you had your sighting, it was in Mississippi. How can you describe the environment there?
Well, it was a highway, and there were some fields where I guess where it was coming from. I guess there was crops out there.
Okay.
Maybe it was eating some of that. Who knows?
But there's plenty of forest and tree cover around nearby accessible to it. So it could go in and out and get into a field, grab some crops or whatever, and then get back into where it lives.
Hmm.
Wow. So this happened, you said in 1998, which is a long time ago, but it
Hmm.
probably seems like yesterday for you.
It does.
How did it change? I mean, how did it change your life? Well, did it, what
Well,
how did it impact you?
it made me less skeptical of the creatures. And I mean, I had always had an interest, but in the back of my mind, I thought, well, maybe they don't exist. I don't know. I kind of had a few moments of self doubt there before my sighting.
Right. Wow.
Right. But once you see it, you see it. Now, I mean,
Hmm.
just generally in your area, because you're in Mississippi, I mean, have you ever heard of any other sightings near there?
Not in that area, no.
Okay. because like what, is it like I mean, because I've never been to Mississippi. So what is the weather like? Because what time of the year did you see this sighting?
This was in January.
Okay, so what's the weather like in January in Mississippi?
Well, sometimes it can be cold, but there are days where it can get kind of warm too.
Okay, so it can be like, so do you remember what the temperature was that day?
It was, I think it was in the 40s.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting.
Definitely is. So Henry, what do you think Bigfoot are? Or Bigfoot. So there's everyone says it a little differently, and I'm not sure who's right, or I just kind of roll with it. But
I think that they are some form of primate, human-like. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Okay.
Yeah, and because you saw one, like you can obviously give us a better description of what you think it might be. Would you say it's closer to an ape than it would be a human?
Well, I can only base my assessment on what I saw.
Right.
And I mean, the thing is, humans are apes. We have to remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are animals.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole human-ape question is a bit moot when you think about it in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just being that it's bipedal might be the only thing that kind of, makes it a little closer to human as opposed to,
Right.
And it was walking bipedally across the highway, correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating story, and
It is a
especially when you can
fascinating
see
story.
it, in front of you. And I think 50 to 60% of all sightings are road crossings, but
Right.
it's just amazing. So I'm
Mhm.
appreciative of you sharing the story with us and making time to do this, Henry.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Henry.
Oh, I want to plug the Sasquatch Experience, by the way. I'm the co-host of that podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, okay. Yeah, tell us about that, Henry.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, SasquatchExperience.com. Sean Forker, Vance Nesbitt, James Baker, and myself. It's every couple of weeks on Mondays at 9 Eastern.
And what do you guys usually do on your podcast?
Well, we discuss various topics in the world of Sasquatch, and we also interview guests. We've had people like Cliff Barackman on and Amy Boo and other fascinating researchers.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's kind of what we do too.
Yeah, so the folks can find it on YouTube as well as all podcast platforms.
Yeah, SasquatchExperience.com.
Cool.
Very cool.
We're
Yeah,
gonna check it out.
Definitely, Henry.
Mm-hmm.
We'll definitely, and if everyone's watching and listening, make sure you check out the podcast, Henry's podcast, and let's thank him again for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Henry. Appreciate it.
No problem, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
You're right. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Awesome. Wow, that was an interesting story.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it is.
That's crazy.
Definitely with.
I would be completely freaked out. I wouldn't pull over either.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think people, and this is coming from someone who's never had an experience, but I've had a couple other things that you don't know how you're going to react. I think a lot of folks you can plan for it, but until you're in that moment, you just don't know what's going to happen. Because I would probably drive as fast as I can somewhere safely, or if I'm out in the woods, the same thing, So it's definitely something that's could be life changing. So it's cool that Henry joined us. So then we're gonna have our next guest is Steve.
Yep.
Steve is former military and also former law enforcement. An interesting thing about Steve's sighting or account is it happened 46 years ago. And he's not told many people about it. I think he may have shared it once publicly, and this may be the second time. So I chatted with Steve, a little bit this past week or two, and just a fascinating story. So I'm excited to pull Steve into the studio. You ready?
I'm ready. Hey, Steve.
There he is. How you doing, Steve?
Hey, how y'all doing?
Hi. We're doing good.
Hey.
We're doing good. We're in the studio. We're
Yeah.
excited to hear your story. I know we've, kind of like read some of it already, but it's nice to hear it in person. So you're in Louisiana, right?
Down in Louisiana, down
No,
south.
that's where you had your sighting.
No.
Oh, am I all wrong? I'm sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I live in Louisiana right now, but the sighting I had was in Arkansas.
Okay.
It was in Arkansas.
So do you want to take us back to when it happened and kind of give us an overview, leading up to how it took place?
Sure. I was military stationed back in 1975 at Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is about 35 miles from here. I live in Maryville, and I had a girlfriend that lived outside of Camden, Arkansas, on a farm with her family. I'd go up there. Well, actually, I met her through a buddy of mine I was stationed with at Fort Polk. And like I told him, once I went ahead and met his sister, we hit it off. And I wasn't going up to Camden, Arkansas to see him anymore. I was going to see her. So, and I hurt his feelings. I'm sorry about that. He's a good friend, but she was prettier than he was. Anyway, so I'd go up there on weekends, basically to get away from post. If you don't know anything about the military, back then on weekends when you were off, if you stayed on post, they needed detail. Guess who they call? So you made yourself scarce, and I know I did. Exactly. So it was a 4.5 hour drive for me up there to the farm, and I enjoyed every minute of it. On the weekends, I'd go up there to help her daddy build fence and tend to the cattle and the hogs. I love that kind of thing. So it was fun for me. They had a big farm, about 250 acres, and it was outside of Camden. And it was kind of like between Camden and Fountain, Arkansas, pretty much in that area right there. A little bit closer to Camden, that's where her family went to church at and everything. And this one particular Friday night, got there, her granny cooked for us. Man, she could cook. Country cooking is just off the chain. And I'm talking about this woman can cook. She's about 70 years old back then. Yeah, about almost a little bit older than I am right now. I'm 65. Of course, I was 19 back then. So you can imagine, a 19-year-old soldier and man, this gal, she could cook. My goodness, it's hurt you. Any case, so we went ahead, and we were sitting in the den, the whole family. We were all sitting there except for her. Her granny was in the kitchen washing dishes. And that's where things kind of set off right then. She screamed. We jumped up. Who's
she?
The granny.
Oh, the granny screamed. Okay.
Her granny, yeah, she was washing dishes in the kitchen. And so when she screamed, we ran inside there. It's a long hallway. I remember that. I was the first one there. And I got inside in the kitchen and almost cut a flip over her. She was right there in the doorway, sitting on her hind end, pointing at the window over the kitchen sink. And she was yelling, "I seen it again! I seen it again!" And her face was white, her eyes was big and wide, and she was scared to death. Automatically, my first inclination was she saw an intruder. And this is 9:30 at night. So, my girlfriend's daddy, her family knew what it was. I didn't. I'm thinking it's an intruder. No one told me anything. No one said, "Hey, Steve, let's let you in on this." Nope. Oh, Steve Reno was in the dark. So her daddy said, "Grab guns." We grabbed guns off the racks in the hallway. I remember this like it was yesterday. I mean, it was such a traumatic experience for me, and I remember the details so well. I was talking to your husband about it. I told him, I said, "This is like yesterday to me." We ran outside. My girlfriend and her mama stayed inside to tend to Granny because she was really shook up pretty bad.
Okay.
We went outside. Her brothers went to the right. Me and her daddy went to the left. I'm just trying to give you the picture here of what this farm layout was. Dead ahead of us was the pasture. Then to the left of that was a big old swamp. We had just not too long ago built a dividing fence from that swamp and the pasture because he didn't want the cattle going in that swamp. It was pretty boggy inside there. So we built that. and a 4-foot cattle panel with a stretch of barbed wire over it. So it was about 5 foot high. As he was walking towards the corner post, I noticed, first thing I noticed was the cattle was all grouped up together far into the pasture. And they were cutting up. And that was a sign that, of course, there was a predator out there. They were spooked, which didn't bother me too much. You know, anything. What got my attention was the dogs. He had 3 blue tick hounds he used for hunting. And they're under the porch. They're under the porch whining. Now, when you got hunting dogs whining, something really has to be bad news to spook them. And that got my attention quick. So now I'm thinking in my mind, what in the world are we after? You know, because if it was an intruder of any kind, they'd be cutting up after him down through the woods. So I asked her, I said, hey, I said, what's up with the dogs? Don't worry about it. Keep on coming. Come on. He wouldn't say anything, which made it bad for me because now I'm in for a shock of my life. We approached the corner post where that dividing fence was, and we caught a stench. It was pretty rough, and I don't want to really put it in a bad way, but all way I can describe it is old matted piss. That's the way I can describe it. I'm excuse for the crude way of saying that.
That's okay.
But that mixed with something dead. I mean, that's all I can say. We approached the corner post, and all of a sudden something started turning and burning inside that thicket. Now, I want to make something real clear before we go on. I guess I'm trying to set the picture for you best I can. It was a bright moon night that night, very bright. I could see across the pasture. I could see the cattle. I mean, it was like daylight outside. If you know how that bright moon works on those kind of nights, everything was just lit up beautifully. And so when we looked at we heard that rustling going on in that thicket. We couldn't see in the thicket. We could see it, but we couldn't see it. It was so thick. And then all of a sudden, this thing jumps the fence. Now, this isn't 100 yards away. This isn't 150 foot away. This is about 25 foot. We walked it off from where we were standing the next morning to where we saw the prints at, where that thing jumped the fence. About 25 foot. Right in front of us, this thing hits the ground. It squatted down and it stands up. And it cleared this fence. It cleared that 5 foot strand of barbed wire. That's impressive right there.
So when you say cleared it, what do you mean cleared it, Steve?
I mean, there was no hair, nothing on it when we checked the next morning. Nothing. It cleared it. It didn't touch the fence. Have you ever seen a deer jump a fence from standstill?
Yes,
they can do it.
Pretty amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. They have powerful hind legs. This creature did the same thing. It wasn't maybe 10 foot back in that thicket, and it jumped that fence. Didn't touch the barbed wire, nothing. It's down there, stands up. When it stands up, that's when my whole world changed right then. Because I'm looking, and my mind's going 100 miles an hour trying to figure out what is it I'm looking at right here. This thing stands up about 8 foot tall, covered in long, stringy hair. Now, it was flank of us. I want you to understand, it was flank of us. It wasn't looking directly at us, so I didn't get a real good look at its face straight on. I did, however, notice its profile. And its profile was as a man. It wasn't a bear. A bear has a snout. A bear has sloped shoulders. This thing had broad, massive shoulders. It had big, massive arms. Bear chest. It was huge, massive, long arms, big, giant hands. And I mean, it was just, I don't know. My mind was trying to figure out what I was looking at. This all happened in a matter of 25, 30 seconds. Then it runs from us. It runs away. Didn't try to aggress us. Didn't try to come at us or anything else. It ran from us like it was scared. It didn't want any contact with us. I had a 12 gauge. Her daddy had a 410, and he was shook up worse than I was. And I'm the one who just seen this thing for the first time. He's seen it before. And this thing here, I'm looking at what in the world I'm looking at. And it's running like a track star. Just like a track star. I mean, it's not falling to all fours. It's running on 2 feet across the pasture.
So, Steve,
yeah.
I was going to ask you. You said it was running. How was it pumping its arms, or I'm just out of curiosity?
Yes, it was running like this, just like that. I mean, widespread. I mean, just legs were, I mean, just about 5. I think we measured like about 4.5 or 5 foot between the stride of the footsteps next morning.
Wow.
It was running fast. I mean, it wanted away from us as fast as we wanted to get away from it, I think. And it had to weigh every bit of 7, maybe 800 pounds. And we're talking about a massive creature.
Okay.
My mind is trying to grasp this. What am I looking at? Is it a bear? No, it's not a bear. I'm trying to rationalize what it is, because I didn't believe these things even existed prior to seeing this. It crashed through the cattle gate. When it crashed through the cattle gate, it let out a roar I never heard in my life. And it started like a panther, like a woman screaming, and it went on to go ahead and end like a big bassy rumble of an elephant or a lion roar, if that makes sense to you right there. It's a very just a guttural roar, and it echoed through the woods. Well, when it
so
ran
it started
through
to it did. I'm sorry, Steve. It did its went to its roar.
I'll say again.
I'm sorry, because so he jumped over the fence, he ran through the pasture, and then that's when it did its roar.
It crashed through the cattle gate.
Oh, to the cattle gate.
It crashed through the cattle gate. After it crashed through the cattle gate, that's when it roared. Now that cattle gate was not made out of balsa wood. We had built that cattle gate not too long before that, and it was made out of 2x6 oak. So pretty stout.
Mm-hmm. So he crashed through it.
Like crashed through it. And we didn't realize the density or the traumatic event of how bad it destroyed that gate till the next morning when we pulled a recon and went out there and looked. But after it crashed that gate and roared, it went on. We did not pursue it. That was it. We stopped right there. About that time, her brothers come around the corner from the house and they used to yell, "Hey, did you hear that? Did you hear that?" I said, "Yeah, we heard it. We seen it too." And they, "You seen it?" "Yeah." So we were all, I mean, adrenaline was pumping. You know, I mean, I'm a 19-year-old ranger. I'm all fired up. I'm just going, I'm thinking, in my mind is going at 100 million miles an hour. What did I just see? Trying to rationalize, same thing. Same time, we're trying to calm down. And I wish I could relate to you everything that was going through me right then, but I can't. I'm just trying the best I can to go ahead and get this to you with the intense. It was just massive. I mean,
you're doing a really good job describing. Well,
like when we talked about it last time, going back brings me back, not just thinking about the thoughts, but it brings me back mentally to it. And it was such I mean, even though 47 years ago, I still to this day get chills over thinking about it. But anyway, so we tried to calm down a little bit. And I went ahead and I got her older brother. He's about 6'4". And I got him to stand under the kitchen window for scale to kind of see how high this thing was, how tall this thing was, in retrospect to what we saw. And he did. He raised his hand up on hard as he could, and he got about 7 foot fingertip wise high, and he can barely touch the bottom rim of that kitchen window. So it put in perspective. It had to have been 8 foot taller tower looking in that kitchen window at Granny.
Because that's what happened. It was looking at Granny from the kitchen window.
Yeah, in the kitchen window.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So and so understand the house was up on pylons. It was jacked up on pylons because it didn't live too far from a river. Evidently, it would overflow every once in a while and flood out, so they had to have the house jacked up. And so this thing looking in the kitchen window, and I found out later on, it's done this a few times. It wasn't the first event. Hence why she said when she was pointing at the window, when we found her in the kitchen, I seen it again. You know, and so we went in the house. I sat down with her and I talked to her a little bit. I said, she was calmed down. Then I said, "Granny," I said, "Look, we didn't see its face real good, and we saw its body real well, its physique, but we didn't see its face real good. I got a side view of its face profile." And I said, "Can you explain to me what you saw?" And she said, "Yeah, I've seen it several times." She said, it's like a huge man's face, but it ain't no man. And it had, you know, big mouth, big nose, and it had big red eyes, red glowing eyes, and it had rough skin on its face. Had hair around its face, but no hair on its face. That makes sense. But big red glowing eyes really caught my attention on that, because that's vampire stuff to me. I couldn't put that in my mind. I've never heard that before. I'm not doubting her, and I didn't doubt her then. I know what I seen, but big red eyes just really threw me off. But I've heard that from other people later on. Anything. So it was that night we sat around talking. No one slept. We were too wired, and I sure wasn't going to sleep. I couldn't get out of my head what I seen.
So when they finally break it to you that they knew about this before?
Well, when she said that she's seen it again, me thinking it was an intruder at first, but once I seen what I seen, then it added up my mind. Hey, look, she's seen this thing before. Well, when I talked to her about it, and she mentioned that she's seen it several times, he told me that it come around several times, then it all made sense then. Evidently, and they both told me that it never tried to attack them. It never tried to break in the house. It never got violent. The only damage ever done was at night on the cattle gate, when it ran through the cattle gate. So that's a good thing. It never tried to, kill the dogs or attack them or anything. The next morning we did a recon, went out there. We went back to the starting point where it jumped the fence and got in the pasture, found the tracks, followed those tracks. And now I want to point this out too. I had sent you a picture of my son found some tracks in Mississippi. When I texted to you. Well, the tracks were kind of like that. That's a whole different thing. That was what he saw up there in Mississippi, but they were kind of like that. You notice how the toes look? They were kind of cut off right there, on that track. That's kind of like how these was. Now, they were huge. We measured them right a little over 17 inches, and I could put foot to toe, heel to toe, almost in one print. Almost. My toes would go over, but that's how big this creature's footprint was across that pasture. And we followed them across that pasture, of course, to the cattle gate. Cattle gate was shredded. And I mean, it splintered those 2x6s. I mean, splintered them. Now, I don't think I told you this part the other day when we talked. I may have, but the force of that creature going through that cattle gate was so massive, so powerful, it literally pulled the corner post over. And you know how big a corner post is on a fence. It's your biggest, part of the fence system. It has to, to support all that weight. It pulled it over. That was made of a cut down telephone pole. So that was really wild. And they didn't break it. We had dug down to reset it, and it was not broken. It was down on the ground 5 foot deep, and it just pulled it over. The amount of power and force to do that is unimaginable. We went on past we did find hair in that barbed wire on the cattle gate. We found none of the point of entry when it came over, but we did find hair. Of course, this is back in 75. Now, I understand what I said before, back in 75, this before computers, before cell phones, we didn't have none of that stuff back then. If we did, trust me, I'd have had pictures everywhere of that stuff, and I'd have kept it. But dummy me, I wish I kept some of that hair. I just didn't think about it, because back then there was no, I guess, no way of analyzing it in that sense as far as the computers. It didn't exist back then. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, because so here's a question for you. So, I mean, was there any thought to maybe we should call wildlife officers here, or the police, or
No. I mean, to me, I would probably would have, to me, but it was their house, their place, and he please let's not talk about it. I don't want the word getting out about this. Back then, I don't know how Camden is now. Back then, Camden was a very small town, very small community. And they did not want the word getting out. The retribution was a big thing back then. They didn't want to get knocked about it and laughed about it and, blackballed from town, so to speak. So he asked me, please don't talk about this. We don't want the word getting out. And I respected that. I did. And so I didn't mention a word. And I went back to post. I never talked about it, and I kept it, hey, I'm not going to, and I didn't. I didn't talk about it at all at post. I pretty much put it in the back of my head. Now, the several times I went back there on weekends afterwards, never saw it again. Now, I can't tell you if they saw it during the week when I wasn't there. But while I was there the next several weeks, I never saw it again. And we never talked about it. When we got over there, it was a situation where we did not even bring it up. So
yeah, that has to be the strangest thing to have an experience like that. So, how did that impact you for just like the rest of your life? Just
well,
knowing that there's something out there.
Yeah, well, I knew right then. I want to tell you this and make this so clear. My whole life, is based in the military and in law enforcement. Everything's based on fact. I look at everything as far as factual. And in law enforcement, my career in law enforcement, everything's based on fact. You can't go on speculation. You have to go with details, facts, everything there, and put together the picture of what you want to go forward with. Now, in the military, basically the same thing. Everything's based on fact. We act upon that. Not believing these creatures existed prior to this event happening, seeing it, I can't find the words. I really can't find the words. It blew my mind to the point of way past that. I can't describe it. I kept it. I just didn't want to talk about it after I left. I guess almost the fear of these things are real, but I didn't admit it to myself. I didn't want to admit it to myself, and I have no choice but to. Now, during my career in law enforcement, I took reports from people that have seen them. I never told them my encounter. But I did go ahead and tell them and comfort them. They were so wired up. Oh, I've seen this. I swear to God, I believe you. I believe you. And I wouldn't tell them why, because I wasn't ready to come out with my story yet. But, I wanted to comfort them.
So are you an outdoorsman, Steve, too? Quick question, honey.
Yes,
are you an outdoorsman?
Yes, ma'am. I love deer hunting. I can see
you have your camo. Hunting. So you like to hunt. Okay. So, when you're out there hunting, are you thinking, oh my gosh, I could run into one again?
Every time I go in the woods, every time. Now, I live in the woods. I want you to understand, I live in the woods, out my back door. And I'm pointing that direction right there. Out my back door, it's 6.5 miles to the woods to the next house. Okay. Wow. In the town of Maryville. I live out in the middle. There's only 6 houses on the hill I live on right now, and that's it. And it's all this farmland out here. So we're near the Texas border. And so it's I live in the middle of the woods, and I hunt all these woods. I've hunted all these woods. And only what got me to talk about this and really come out, I wouldn't tell my wife, I wouldn't tell my kids, nothing, was my wife's uncle. Name was Lewis Gill. We were best hunting buddies. And he was like my own uncle. He was a great guy. He's passed away now. Lord rest his soul. But we hunted all these woods together for years and years and years. Deer hunted, squirrel hunted, hog hunting. And he was a down-to-earth feller. Now, of course, he was, he was about 75, 76 years old back then when we were hunting together. And very active person himself. One day, I was thinking of a new place to hunt at, and I was thinking about Anacoca Swamp, which is about 15 miles from here. And so I asked him, I said, Uncle Lewis, I said, how about going to Anacoca Swamp and hunting over there? And he said, no, I'm not going there. I ain't been there in years, and I'm not going back. And I thought, well, in my mind, because the terrain is pretty rough over there, a lot of hills, swamps, and everything else, and it's hard to, get around. And for an older feller, for him, now me, I could do it, but he told me, he said, "No, don't go." I said, "Well, okay, well, the terrain's pretty rough, Uncle Lewis. I understand that." He said, "No, it's not the terrain. That's not why I don't go back there." He said, "I seen something several years ago, and I ain't gone back since." Well, that got my curiosity up. And old Steve Marino's going to dig in. I mean, the old law enforcement inside me wants to ask questions, right? So, I said, "What'd you see?" He said, "I don't want to talk about it." Okay, I understand. And so I said, "You know what? Best way to get him to talk about what he saw was for the first time come out with my story." And I explained to him, my encounter I had years before in Arkansas. And after that, he looked at me and he said, "Maybe I'm not crazy." I said, "Uncle Lewis, I promise you, you're not crazy." And he told me his encounter. It happened back there. He's seen one over here, 15 miles from here, in Anacoca Swamp. And him and another old boy that I knew real well too, Milton Hickenbottom, they both went out there back in the 50s. They was youngsters back then, squirrel hunt. And they seen one out there at daylight, broke, and creature was standing across the creek from them on a white sandbar. And he said it had to be 9 or 10 foot tall, covered in hair. And they thought it was a tree. It was just standing there. I mean, wouldn't move, just standing there, looking. And as the daylight progressed and they could make out kind of things, they noticed it wasn't no tree. It had long hair all over it and it's standing there, but it was freeze-framed. Then it reached up, he said, and he grabbed a hold of a limb coming off the bluff, and he said it reared back and it let out a big old roar. When it did that, boy, Uncle Lewis said, he told me, he said, my hair stood up, my hat popped off my head.
Oh my God. So,
and scared that old boy there, I'll tell you what, took a lot, because he was hardcore, Anyway, so they waited for the creature. It walked up on a bluff and walked in the woods. They waited for it to get a distance away because they sure don't want to get around it. And they crossed the creek, went down there, found the tracks, and seeing where it stepped up on the bluff. And he said that limb coming off that bluff is about 12 foot high. So it had to be at least 10 foot tall to go ahead and reach that.
Yeah.
So it made him feel better when I told him my encounter. But it really felt kind of good for me to go ahead and explain it to him too. First time in how many years to go ahead and let it out the box. And at that point, then I told my wife and my kids and all them about it, and it became a little bit easier. And then, of course, when I got with Miguel on Sasquatch theory, and he had me tell my encounter on that, it really helped a lot. I got a lot of private messages from a lot of people telling me, "Thank you so much for sharing this," because it helped me come forward with my encounter. And that's what's important, I think. And that's what kind of thing I want to put across to people is if they've had an encounter, it's so important to come forward with it, not just so others can hear it, but what it can do for you. I can't tell you the therapy it's been for me to come out there and be able to let this off my chest. I mean, at 19 years old, I had to wait, here I am 65, but you know what? It feels great to do it. And I mean, wow. And I've had some other encounters that happened in the close vicinity of this, but this was the most, I think, it let me know that we're not alone in these woods. There's more out here than what we think and what we've been taught. And I think, people say, well, how come we don't see these things on trail cams? How come they aren't being seen more in the woods? Why aren't they? If you could see him as much as he sees you, you'd understand. I promise you, they see us before we see them. Like I was telling you earlier, we talked, I was telling your husband that these creatures, you have the best of both worlds. You have a creature that's part human, with a degree of human intel and animal instinct, animal ability, animal sixth sense. So they have the speed and agility of a deer or a bobcat, yet the human intel, you get the perfect creature. Because animals will sit there at the wood line, and you can't see them because they freeze frame. They stand still. They won't move. We sense things by movement. And so if they see it, I promise you, they've seen many people that have not seen them. And people
I believe.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They mistake them for trees and everything, But
here's a question for you, Steve. So
sure.
I know you're not I know your background is law enforcement and being in the military, but just as an average person, what would you say that these creatures are? If you had to guess, what are they?
I would say they have to be something like I would get a missing link, so to speak. They're obviously a flesh and blood creature.
Right.
Now, I've heard people say they're associated with UFOs. I've never seen a UFO around one, so I'm not going to say they are from another planet. I'm not going to say they are not. I don't know. I won't speculate on things I don't know. I'm not going to sit there and say that yes or no against that. I don't know. I don't know enough about them to make that statement. But I do know they're a living creature. They're real. Right. There's no question about that. What they are, a missing link or something, between a human and an animal type of a thing. I believe my personal aspect on it, the reason we're seeing more of them now is because all the wood cutting on right now. They're clearing the forests out. The habitat is being shaved down. They're cutting trees everywhere. 100 years ago, it would take them 6 months to clear 10 acres. Today, they clear 100 acres in about 2 weeks. They have the equipment to do that, technology. So they're clearing out all these forests. And what's happening is these creatures are losing their habitat, and that's why they're being seen more and more, I believe. That's my personal thing. What I believe.
Makes a lot of sense.
Well, from what I've, kind of studied about them a little bit, and my curiosity was up after we seen what I seen. At Fort Polk, we had an incident over there happen where I didn't see it. But a whole battalion did. 1st and 40th Armor. I was the 1st Infantry Battalion back in 75, 76 over there at Fort Polk. 1st and 40th Armor was en route to Peace on Ridge, which is in Constitute National Forest over here in Louisiana. Huge national preserve. And with military, would use that a lot for training. We had a section of it called Peace on Ridge. We'd go there all the time. And anyone who's at Fort Polk knows about Solon. A lot of stories behind that. But in any case, 1st and 40th Armor Battalion was going down dirt roads over there in Peaceon, and the whole battalion seen this creature. Hundreds of soldiers saw this creature, and it crossed the road. Huge. Well, the BC battalion commander, he went ahead and go back to division headquarters. General Hal Dang was post commander back then. I remember him very well. And he immediately went ahead and shut down the post for a week. All the units, 1st Infantry, 3rd and 40th, 1st and 40th, all of us, 5th Single Battalion, all of us got out there, and our orders were to go ahead and go to the backwoods of Fort Polk looking for this creature. MPs had locked all the gates down to Fort Polk, because back then it was an open post. You were civilian, you can cross the post, no problem. People would do it all the time. But once they locked it down, no one but military personnel and authorized personnel, authorized civilians were able to go on post for that week. We went through there, didn't see a creature. Now, we did hear something, and we did find a deuce and a half that was crushed. Military transport vehicle was crushed. We've seen that. But we didn't see the creature. However, we did hear through the grapevine, this was not verified, that it was caught. Now, again, here's a grain of salt. Do I believe it was caught? Possibly. I don't know. I'm just saying what we heard. But that was a situation right there. Really, we got talking amongst ourselves about that, and but after my encounter in Arkansas, they must believe that it was real, whatever it was.
So,
something destroyed
Steve,
that truck.
What did they tell you? You know, when they said, did they say are you going out? Did they say go out look for a creature? What did they call it when they described what you were doing?
They said a very large creature was seen out on Peason Ridge, and we're to go out there and look for it. If we see it, we're supposed to radio back to command. That's what we were told. That was our orders. We never did see it. However, we did find the truck. We radioed back to that, told them that we found the crushed used to have. They came out to verify that, get pictures and everything, but we never saw the creature. But later on, we had heard, several days later, that the creature was caught. That's what we heard from the grapevine from other soldiers. But, you know, again, I can't tell you if that was true or not.
So, I mean, that almost goes to show you that there is, that there's possibly that the government knows about this.
Oh, I'm sure. Look, when being in the military, and I'll tell you what, I had a high clearance, and you know, we were sent on TDY missions all the time, constantly. Everything's on the hush hush, and we were always told. You know, I've heard so many things that. You know, I work in supply. Every once in a while, we cross train, and I work in supply. And when you work in supply, looking at the bill of lading, you know, Uncle Sam's paying $800 for a screwdriver, $1,000 for a hammer. This was the prices of things you can buy at the store for $5, $6, and they're paying $1,000 for them, $800 for them. Why? Why are they paying that? Well, this is one of the ways they're funding these secret projects. You see, that's how they get their money right there to do that. And it's wild. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. A lot of things going on.
Sounds like another show.
It seems like another show entirely. We'll have to get Steve back for that.
There's a lot of things I didn't even tell you last time we talked. You know, I've you know, I'm reluctant to even talk about some of those things because it gets really way into I'm 100% American, an American patriot. I'm, you know, 65 years old. If I was called to go back in the military today, I'd go back in a heartbeat, fight for my country. That's how much I love this country. But our government is very deceptive. You know, and the back workings of the government, very deceptive.
Right. I'm sure there's certain things they just can't share with everybody.
Oh no, there's because we wouldn't. People just wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand, and because we're brought up in a world to believe. Well, it's black and white. It's right in front of you. If it's not in the book, it doesn't exist, and that's what we're taught to believe. But when you start coming across things that don't add up to what we've been taught and go against what we've been taught, it's time to go ahead and reevaluate. And that's exactly what it is. I you know, being retired from law enforcement, I worked for the Beauregard Parish Sheriff's Department, PGWP, and also Department of Corrections. And I can tell you, I've heard all kind of things. I was a captain in the Department of Corrections, and as a captain, I went into sections of the compounds that, you know, by myself, just making rounds, and heard things and seen things that I can't explain. I bet. Yeah. So, and that's another story too.
Yeah, we definitely have to get to that, Steve. Yeah, we're definitely.
That's kind of screwed. It's there. We can go with that, but I mean, yeah, another show, whatever. But
yeah, definitely. I can't wait. I just want to say again, this has been. We're just so blessed to have you join and participate and share your story.
Yep, and thank you for your service, both in law enforcement and in the military, protecting us. We appreciate that. And you're such a great storyteller, Steve.
Yeah,
it was like we could just let you go. You're awesome.
What I am basically is, like I tell your husband, I'm an old fella that is sharing his experiences and memories. That's all I do, you know. And at one point in time, you know, I'd be very, you know, skeptical about going out and coming forward with some of these things. But now I'm 65 years old. I'm 3/4 of the way through the game. You know, why not?
Well, we appreciate it, Steve.
And I'm sure others will too, Steve. And I'm 100% sure that we'll continue to stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve.
Man. And, I look forward. I love talking to you guys. It's been great.
Good. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
All right. Talk to you soon, Steve.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah, Steve was pretty cool.
That was
we had fun. Henry was great.
Yep, Henry was great too.
So it's just a good fun experience. And I think going to go back to something Cliff told me a while ago. It just when we did the book, Cliff said that when they did the town halls and finding Bigfoot, he said the biggest takeaway for that was people were able to just get it off their chest, and they were able to, even if they didn't tell their story, they were around people that were telling their stories, so that it made them feel like they weren't crazy. So
and they weren't going to ridicule them or think they were wacky or anything like that.
So I think that's what's kind of cool. And what Steve did, I mean, he held it in for 20 plus years before he told anybody.
I know, that's a long time.
Yeah. So,
but it was really great to have both of them on. And thanks so much for joining us for our first witness show.
Definitely.
So we're excited about that.
So you guys make sure you get Untold Radio AM. Like and subscribe. We have a ton of great shows on there.
Yep, we do. So, and then we have some upcoming guests coming on.
Oh yeah, who's coming up?
We're gonna have Michael Mays or Michael Mayers. Michael May. Oh, I said it right the first time. Yeah. Sorry, Michael. But we're super excited to have him on, and as well we have Dr. Jeff Meldrum coming up too. The week after, so we're going to have some more researchers in our interview of our influencers, and so we're excited about those, and we're excited to share everything with you again.
I think we have the one and only Doug Highchat joining us soon too. Ooh. So that'll be amazing. We're deciding what we're going to get into with Doug. That can go. I mean, we could get into so much cool things with him. So
exactly.
But we thank you guys.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you allowing us to introduce you to all of the people in the Bigfoot world who influence.
And now some witnesses.
Yep.
So see you guys later.
Thank you.